I didn't necessarily think it was going to succeed because I didn't have any restaurant experience. And frankly, over the years where I was a caterer, and I actually applied to work in several restaurants and I never even got an interview. Like I was so not even considered to be hired in a restaurant. So it was really like, okay, I'm going to try this out. Maybe it will fail or maybe it will succeed.
Welcome to Sisters Inc., our podcast for and about women business owners, brought to you by Black Enterprise. I'm your host, Elisa Gumbs. Black women are the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs in America. And on every episode of Sisters Inc., we'll sit down with one successful CEO and share how she slays the challenges of being a Black woman in business. Today's episode is all about building an empire. We're chatting with Helene Henderson, chef and founder at Malibu Farm. She started by teaching cooking classes and hosting dinners at home in California in 2008 before opening a cafe in 2013. And now she has multiple Malibu Farm locations, including Hawaii, New York, and even Japan. Welcome to Sisters Inc., Helena, and thanks so much for sitting down with us today.
Thank you for having me.
You have a love for all things food and gardening and farms and farmers markets. Where did that passion come from? And when did you decide that you could make a business out of it?
You know, I grew up in the north of Sweden and we foraged a lot, we fished a lot. So it was kind of part of my upbringing to do that. After the Northridge earthquake here in California, I was definitely all about how do I grow my own food? How do I live a more sustainable life? How am I not so susceptible to natural disasters? It's one of the goals that I had that I wanted to do.
Yeah. And did you realize that that passion would, be your business one day, or did you always sort of think of it as a hobby?
I did not think it was going to be a business. Literally after Northridge earthquake, I was like, my dream is to live in a one-story house because we lived in a two-story house and the kids were little and we're running in this earthquake, which is very traumatic. So I was like, I want to live in a one-story house with a big garden. I'm going to grow my own food. I'm going to be self-sustainable. And that was my goal more so than doing any sort of business.
Is that what led you to buy the home that, functions as a farm for you?
Yep. So then we moved to Malibu, and it has a pretty, big property. So I started growing much more of my own things, having bees, having goats, trying to milk my goats, having chickens, having a pig. I even had sheep at some point. Um, and then I started doing the cooking classes and the dinners, and it all kind of just spiraled from there.
So your very first location you opened as a counter service cafe as opposed to a full service restaurant. Was that a strategic choice for you?
The first cafe was a short-term pop-up. It wasn't even a long-term thing. And it had been a counter service restaurant before, so I did very limited changes to it. I didn't really think necessarily it was gonna succeed. It was again a short-term thing. The commitment was minimal, and it wasn't set up for full service. It was set up for counter
Yeah.
service.
And I read that part of the reason that you started doing that was that, your dinners that you were hosting at home had gotten so big and you had taken them on the road to other farms and stuff, but it was basically like running an unpermitted restaurant at some point and you were like, "Oh, perhaps I should go, do this officially."
I was shut down by the city of Malibu as I should have been because it was a little obnoxious to the neighbors and the neighborhood. So I'm sorry, city of Malibu, I shouldn't. But so yeah, I was actually shut down. So then I was looking to move my dinners elsewhere. And it was always this search of where do I go next.
Okay. What was the learning curve like for you to get that first location up and running?
I think one of the learning curves is I always didn't necessarily plan to succeed. I always assumed or planned to fail. And some of those things are good, and then some of those things are not necessarily helpful. So even when I started a blog because I was teaching cooking classes and the people wanted recipes, and then I didn't have any recipes. So then somebody's like, you should start a blog and you can post your recipes there. So then I was like, okay, I've never written a blog. Let me go on WordPress. And I actually ran this catering company called Lavender Farms for like 20 years. And it was almost like one of those things where oh, should I call it the Lavender Farms blog and keep that going? Last minute, I said, you know, I'm going to call it Malibu Farm. So then when I went on WordPress, Malibu Farm was available. So I got that. But the domain name was not available. So, and somebody was trying to sell it. You could buy it. And it was like $8,000, maybe something like that. And I was like, I'm teaching cooking classes for $20 a person, $8,000 for the domain name? I'm not going to do that. So instead, which is now annoying because we don't have that. So everything we do with the emails is malibu-farm.com. And my daughter is like, Mom, why didn't you buy the domain? I was like, well, I didn't know that it seemed like a big expenditure, right? So that's when I was thinking small and not thinking, oh, in the future, I should own this. I just thought, wow, $8,000 is too much money. I'm not going to buy it. But now with the emails, like every manager that has an email to Malibu Farm, instead of it being whatever, Maria at Malibu Farm is Maria at Malibu-farm.com, which does get annoying.
Well, yes. But the amazing thing I think about it here is that, you were hosting these dinners, which is one set of skills. You were writing recipes, eventually became a cookbook author, which is a different set of skills. You were teaching cooking classes, which again is another set of skills. But then running a restaurant is sort of brand new. And just because you know how to cook or how to host or how to create recipes doesn't necessarily know that you know how to run a restaurant. So what were some of the things that surprised you when you first started your business that you had to figure out?
Well, I'd actually never been in a restaurant kitchen in my entire life when I opened. And one of the things that I didn't think of, I ran it like a catering operation because I'm a caterer, right? So I was like, I'm going to run a 5-day week and I'm going to open at 9 a.m. I still had a private chef job at night. So I was like, I'm going to run a 9 to 3 and I can get to my other job by 6 because again, I'm operating from this is probably not going to succeed, right? How do I cover my bases? So if I open in the morning, I can still go do the job at night and I'll probably make enough to cover my losses during the day. That was my thought process. And then I'd had the dinners and we would have square readers with like our phone and people would, buy tickets there. But when I opened the restaurant, I didn't realize you needed tickets. Like it was like, how does the kitchen know what to make? It's because you have a printer that prints a ticket in your kitchen. And so when we opened, we didn't have any printers. So then that was like, whoa. And then the first couple of days, people had to circle on the menu and give it to the kitchen because we didn't have a system set up to even print tickets because I just didn't know. I'd never been in a restaurant kitchen.
So you literally learned everything like on the fly.
On the fly, yeah.
I want to get back to something you said because you said it twice now, and I've spoken to so many entrepreneurs over the years, but you're the first person who's ever told me like that I planned for this to fail. And so I just have to ask more about that. Like why did you think that? And sort of what was the different approach that you had because you thought that it was going to fail?
I mean, I didn't necessarily think it was going to succeed because I didn't have any restaurant experience. And frankly, over the years where I was a caterer, and I actually applied to work in several restaurants and I never even got an interview. Like I was so not even considered to be hired in a restaurant. So it was really like, okay, I'm going to try this out. Maybe it will fail or maybe it will succeed. But I'm not so cocky that I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to throw a ton of money at this and it's going to definitely work. I was like, I'm going to be super cautious here, which is why I decided to keep my private chef job. Although a week later I had to give it up because we were busy from day one. And it was like, holy moly, how can I do this? But yeah, I wasn't, I wouldn't say I was 100% sure it was going to succeed.
Wow. I think that makes your story all the more amazing because, I mean, when you look at all the locations you've opened over the years and you said they wouldn't even hire you to work in a restaurant and now you own multiple restaurants. Like it's so, so impressive. I want to talk about the building of that empire of restaurants. And people always say that the biggest leap in parenthood is going from one kid to two. I'm wondering if restaurants are the same. Like, what was that big jump like to opening your second location?
Funnily enough, the second location was a license in Lanai. And here's where like random small decisions kind of steer your path. When I opened at the end of the pier, I mean, I love coffee. I'm all about coffee. And a friend of mine, Gary, has this coffee company, Cafe Lux, and he came to many of my dinners and gave out coffee. So when I opened, I wanted to have an espresso machine and do full on espresso service. Now people were laughing. They were like, why are you doing that? And that is one thing I did spend money on because an espresso machine is really expensive, but you can also sell them. They have good resale value. So I'm like, I believe in coffee. I'm gonna do coffee. I'm gonna do coffee really, really well. And then, funnily enough, which I didn't know, but Malibu is a small community, and Larry Ellison lives down the street, and Mayor Tepper, who is a co-owner at Nobu, lives down the street. And they, unknowns to my knowledge, were fans of Cafe Lux. Now they would be driving into Brentwood, where the closest Cafe Lux was. So then they heard that I had Cafe Lux on the pier. So they were one of the very first customers that would roll into the pier. And then one day, one of the staff working there was like, the mayor is here. He wants to meet you. And I'm thinking, the mayor of what? Los Angeles? Malibu? But it turns out his name is Mayor, Meir, Tepper. And he is part owner of Nobu. And he was like, I love your restaurant. I want you to meet my friend Larry Ellison. And then Larry is like, hi, Elena, I'm opening in Illinois. Do you want to open a unit there? And it was just like, I'm like, hello, Larry, anyway, so that happened just very quickly. But if I hadn't had the coffee, I don't know that would have come to fruition.
Well, I mean, if you can make a first location that's so popular that the co-owner of Nobu becomes a fan and says, "Hey, I want to connect you with my other restaurateur friends," then you're doing something right for sure.
Yeah. And the New York location is also tied to that because David Weinreb, who was the CEO of Howard Hughes when the seaport opened, was also a friend of Mayor Tepper, who he brought to the pier.
Okay. So a lot of connections and networking is part of how you got the
Happened through a
opportunity.
tiny cafe at the end of the pier that was having good coffee. Yeah,
Okay.
basically.
So I know that some of those opportunities presented themselves to you, but for others, you made the choice, to open another location. And I'm hoping that you can talk us through your decision-making process. Like, how did you assess when it was the right time to expand and where to go next?
So the one thing that I would probably do differently for anyone is I didn't read my lease that carefully because again, it was a short-term pop-up. I wasn't sure it was going to succeed, and it had a very huge exclusion zone, which meant I couldn't operate or do anything in any restaurant within an exclusion zone, which was huge. It was like 30 miles from the border of Malibu. But if you take the city of Malibu is very long and it goes like this. So then 30 miles, as the crow flies from every border, takes you all the way to Pasadena. It takes you all the way to Santa Barbara. It takes you all the way to Newport Beach. So it excluded a lot of opportunities that I had that were closer to me. So then the first one that reached out was a landlord in Lido Marina Village, which was right outside my exclusion zone. And so then it's kind of like, okay, this is outside the exclusion zone. It's waterfront. Is it a really cute shopping center? So then that kind of guided that. I had a lot of opportunities within my zone, but I couldn't even entertain those. So that's kind of like the first one that we were operating that was signed on to, and it was simply because it's a cute location, waterfront, outside the exclusion zone.
Okay. And was there like some milestone that you would get to with your current locations where you would be like, okay, I feel like this is in good shape and I can turn my attention away to opening a second or a third or another location? Like, how did you know like when was the right time or that you had the capability to take on more things?
I don't know if I had that sort of moment. I would say every location we open is because a landlord reached out to us. And then it was kind of like, let's look at this. And sometimes we were hemming and hawing for a very long time, going back and forth. I don't think that we ever actively pursued a location. It was more somebody presented a location and it's like, good, let's go check it out. Okay, what are the terms here? And what? So it was more happening naturally that way.
Okay. So I know that you just mentioned your exclusion zone, so you couldn't really stay within your home base. You had to branch out. But a lot of small business owners talk about the fact that they have had to do a lot to figure out the red tape, the laws, the regulations, all of that kind of stuff in their own neighborhoods or cities. You started expanding to other cities and eventually other states and other countries. How did you navigate that process of opening and running businesses in places that you weren't familiar with?
It definitely would have been a lot easier to operate closer. Yes, because you can visit more easily, you can check into it. All our locations, everything is almost like at least a 2-hour drive in one direction. So that is definitely harder to oversee. I would have probably preferred to stay closer, but that just wasn't an option for us. It definitely is a lot to oversee, but there's also a fair amount of help, that you can reach out that can guide you through some of those processes. Like with your liquor license, you have to get somebody who helps you get it, and then they're telling you all the requirements for that. Our bookkeeping company, they do a lot of restaurants, so they also do a lot of consulting on that. So they help with labor laws and all of those
Okay.
things.
So you
So
took
yeah,
advantage of the team. You used some local
yeah,
help, some consultants, and that's how you navigated that.
yeah. And some things you just learn as you go. You're like, oops,
Yeah, we're gonna talk about the oopses too, but I want to stay with the expanding because you know very few Black American entrepreneurs have been able to expand internationally, and you of course have opened a restaurant in Japan now. Can you tell us what it was like that kind of expansion?
So that was a license. So New York, Tokyo, and Lanai are licensed
Okay.
operations. So I would say it's almost impossible. Would be very difficult to operate something out of state and in another country. So you do need a partner to do that.
I feel like I'm learning so much as I go through this. You talk about licenses and most entrepreneurs, I think when they get into their business, they don't know anything about that. So, when you started, did you even know that that was a possibility? Or was that another learning curve for you to say, hey, how does it work for me to license out my business?
Yeah, I didn't know anything about licenses either. They were proposed to me, and then that did sound like a good idea. It does have some ups and downs. When you have a license, you have less control, but you also have no financial obligations. Like you can't lose money, even if the business is losing money, you don't lose money, right? So that's that. I know a lot of chefs like license deals. If you have a lot of them, you can make good living without having any sort of a personal investment into it, which can be nice. You do have less control, so there's that.
Okay. And then I know that there have been some locations that you opened that eventually closed, and they may have all been licenses as well, so that, may affect it. But you opened restaurants in Montecito, Miami, and Cabo that have since closed. What did you learn from those experiences?
Yeah, they all closed during the pandemic. I think what we learned from the license is that you definitely don't have that much control. It's very difficult to be in a hotel, so I would definitely caution anyone to be in a hotel and really look at what that means. For example, for us, what it meant at some of the places is that the Malibu Farm served the hotel breakfast to all the guests. And so some of those hotels would then have, if it's a slow season, for example, included in the hotel rate. So now the hotel rate is really low and all of the guests get free breakfast. It's not free breakfast, but it's included in the hotel grill. So now if you're a restaurant, we're trying to uphold a certain quality, but we have 400 guests coming every morning between whatever time it is, 7 a.m. and 9:30 or whatever time breakfast goes, where we have to churn out all of these meals that we're not actually getting credited for, right? And then the guests are kind of giving you bad reviews because you're like, if you're not a regular customer and you're trying to go to a Malibu Farm, but there's 400 customers there that are eating hotel breakfast that they're not actually paying for is included in the so it's very hard to, and I understand the hotels need to do that, right? Because a lot of hotels breakfast is all inclusive. But then if you're trying to be a brand restaurant and you are burdened with all of these guests, it can really affect the customer experience. So we would get a lot
Yeah.
of complaints from the people that were not hotel guests, but they're like, oh, we want to go to, this Malibu Farm, which is a beautiful waterfront location. And then, it's just a very different experience.
Yeah. And I imagine that I know you mentioned that even though you don't lose any money on these deals, your brand can take a hit to its reputation if things, like you said, if the customer experience is not good and they can't maintain the quality that Malibu Farm is known for. Yeah. So you now have 7 restaurants, including the licenses, and they go across the globe. But for the restaurants that you are running yourself, what is your secret to staying on top of it all? As you mentioned, they are not right next to each other. You can't just pop from one to the other. How do you manage that?
I mean, that's definitely not easy, and I don't necessarily know that we succeed 100% of the time on doing on the oversight. I think the number one thing that makes it easier, which was for San Diego, for example, we did have some of our team members from the other locations that moved there. So that, San Diego is one of the easier openings because everybody wants to move to San Diego. So when you go to your management team, everyone's like, I'll move to San Diego. Yeah. Even when the chefs, I'll move to San Diego. Tiburon, for example, which is outside San Francisco, much more difficult. Beautiful town, but nobody really from our team wanted to move there because the area is more expensive. People don't really know it. It doesn't have the same blur, I guess, that San Diego has. So San Diego was significantly easier to open than Tiburon because we were able to take some of our top people from the locations where they're at to move to San Diego. And then the people could just step up. Like the system manager then became the manager at the Malibu location. And at Lido, the assistant chef became the chef at Lido because the head chef of Lido and the main manager of Malibu moved to San Diego. So that made that so much easier. Whereas Tiburon, we couldn't get anyone to move over there, even though it's beautiful up there. So that was a lot more challenging to get that open and to oversee.
So I'm hearing that the pipeline is very important.
Yeah, it's important where it is and where people want to move because the easiest thing and the best thing for everybody is if you can promote somebody up who wants to move. And a lot of people want to be promoted up, and they might be stuck in, an assistant manager position for a very long time if the actual manager doesn't move, or be stuck in a sous chef position if the actual chef doesn't move. So it's good when people expand and get promoted within the company. It's great. Obviously, it's a lot easier if your locations were closer together, but because we have the exclusion zone, it is always a big move. So harder to do so. But if your restaurants are closer together, that would be the ideal way to do it, that you're promoting within.
Do you feel any pressure as the owner to sort of be everywhere all at once for the locations that you manage?
I mean, I know I can't. So it's almost like you have to trust the people that you promote up to do their thing. And you also have to give them the opportunity to lead. I feel like even in my Malibu location, where there's always a head chef, there was at a point where I decided to step back a bit. Because here's the thing, some of the people we hired in the kitchen was back when I was in the kitchen. And if I'm around, they only listen to me, right? They don't listen to the chef. So then the chef doesn't have an ability to lead. So then it becomes important for me to say, hey, you have to resolve this with the chef. You have to resolve this with the manager. If it becomes to the point that they need help, then the chef has to come to me and say, hey, will you come and deal with the situation in the kitchen? Or will you come and deal with this situation in the front of the house? Because otherwise, everybody's running to me, right? And then it means that the manager cannot manage and the chef cannot lead. So sometimes you do have to let them step up and take ownership of their positions. And if you micromanage anything, you're never going to get anyone that's good to work for you, right?
Very true. So, looking back on the journey of opening all your locations, the oops that you mentioned earlier, is there anything that you would do differently if you had a do over?
I mean, it's hard to say. I would say the main thing would maybe be like paying more attention to the lease when I signed it. Uh, it's great that we're waterfront, all our locations, but it might have been better to diversify in that way, because when it rains, all our locations are down. Right? It's not like, oh, it's a rainy day. We got this cool place in downtown LA that's now picking up a lot of business or whatever it is, right? Every location is down significantly when it rains. And sometimes, like last year, 2024, it rained a ton here in California almost every single weekend. So then you're like, "Ah, man, I wish we, I wish we weren't all outdoor seating."
Yeah, that is something that I had not considered. I was like, "Oh, you've got all these great waterfront locations, and you also have a situation where your revenues are somewhat dependent on the weather."
They're very dependent by the weather. Yeah. The weather rules all. People don't sit and say, it's a pouring rain, it's a cold, freezing day. Let's go sit outside on the beach. Said
Right.
no one ever.
So, what is the best advice you can share with other entrepreneurs who are considering expanding their businesses from one location or who want to build their own mini empires like Malibu Farm?
I mean, I guess I'm torn between the plan to fail or plan to succeed. I think there are some things like I didn't really care. For example, my minimum rent in Malibu is very, very high, but my percentage is very low. I mean, sorry, my minimum rent is very low, but my percentage is very high, because wasn't sure I was going to succeed. I was more concerned with my minimum rent, because I'm like, oh, the minimum rent, I can cover that with my private chef job. But then if you succeed and your percentage rent is extremely high, there's no way to get away from that, right? I didn't really think about that implication. So that's something that I would look at, your minimum rent versus your percentage rent. And the thing with the website, not doing the Malibu Farm, that seemed, I wasn't really thinking about that. I think I wasn't really planning 100% for success. And I think maybe there are ways where I would have done that differently. In the beginning, we didn't have recipes for a very long time, because I was always cooking everything myself. And I didn't even use recipes. So I was just cooking. And then it was kind of like one day, you have a license and they're like, do you have these recipes? And it's like, recipes? I wasn't really thinking, oh, I'm going to need these detailed, measured, weighed out recipes because I didn't, really know that it was going to succeed.
So plan for the possible long-term success of your
Yes.
business.
Yes. I think that was like rough with our first license, and they were scrambling to get these recipes together that look professional, right? So yeah, I think planning for to succeed is a good thing, but you should always be cautious too financially because you don't want to get yourself in that place where you just are taking on a burden that you cannot afford.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Helena, for sharing your small business success story. Everyone out there, please take a look at the company website, malibu-farm.com.
That's right.
Don't forget the hyphen.
Well, now at least with Google, if you just put in Malibu Farm, it'll take you there. But in the early days, when it was like so low on the Google searches, it was hard for people to find it. So
Yes. You can also follow them on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, or X at Malibu Farm.
thank you for having me.
Check out the video channel on blackenterprise.com to find Sisters Inc. and other shows from Black Enterprise editors, writers, and experts. Be sure to subscribe to Sisters Inc. on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or SoundCloud. And if you like what you hear, show us some love by leaving a 5-star review or put a sister on by spreading the word. I'm Lisa Gums with Sisters Inc. for Black Enterprise. Thank you for listening. For 5 decades, we've had your back. Sisters Inc. and Black Enterprise have everything you need to elevate your excellence.